Hello everyone. So in the previous class we have discussed about the disposal of effluents, that is disposal of the sewage effluents or wastewater into the water bodies and also onto the land, that is what are the consequences of disposal into the water bodies and how to dispose it. Okay, what are the municipal standards which allow us to dispose the wastewater, that is what is meant by the primary treatment and things like that. Okay, so in today's class we shall discuss about the zones of pollution in a river or a stream. Okay, so we have studied the phenomena of the self purification of rivers, that is when you discharge wastewater into the river, the oxygen present in the dissolved oxygen starts to decrease. Okay, and again it starts to increase after over a period of time, and the self purification phenomena happens naturally. Okay, so to understand it more clearly, so it is explained with the different zones of purification. Okay, so which is as shown in this slide. So the first zone of self purification which is formed is called as zone of degradation. The second zone is called as zone of active decomposition. Then third zone is zone of recovery, and fourth zone is zone of clearer water. Okay, so let us see what are different zones and what changes we are going to happen in these different zones. Okay, so here when you discharge the wastewater, okay, so this curve represents the 100% saturation level. Okay, so before you discharge any sewage or wastewater into the receiving water bodies. Okay, so the dissolved oxygen level will be at the saturation level, which could be depends on so many factors. So it may be around 6 to 8 milligram per liter. Okay, for any receiving stream or a lake. Okay, so here, so this first zone will be a clear water zone before you discharge the wastewater. Okay, so then the first zone after you discharge the wastewater is called as zone of degradation. Okay, so in this zone, as you can see, the oxygen level is slowly decreasing from its saturation level. Okay, so and it may go up to 40%. Yeah. Okay, so here the floating solids and some of the settleable solids, it gets to deposit at the bottom. Okay, so and the tolerant fishes like carps, buffalo, giri, etc. That will be present in this zone of degradation level. Okay, and some of the bottom animals will be present, and some algae and protozoans will be there. Okay, so which require very little oxygen, and some of the tolerant species, most of the species tend to die. So some tolerant species which can survive in the range of 2 to 4 mg per liter will survive in this zone. So this is called a zone of degradation. That means the oxygen level slowly starts to depreciate in the receiving water body. So then the second zone is called as zone of active decomposition. So here what happens when the wastewater is discharged, the organic matter present in the wastewater so will be used up by the bacteria and other aquatic organisms which are present in the aquatic systems or receiving water body. Okay, and the oxygen level, it starts to decompose, this starts to depreciate, and the decomposition starts with the evolution of the gases like methane and carbon dioxide. Okay, here what happens, so due to the anaerobic decomposition, the end products are hydrogen sulfide and methane. Okay, and also some oxygen which is present in contact, the end products will be carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so this will takes place here in this zone. There won't be any fishes present because the oxygen saturation level of the oxygen drops to almost nil or zero in this case, because the active decomposition takes place utilizing more and more oxygen in this zone. Okay, and some of the bottom dwelling animals may be present. Okay, and some algae and protozoas and some small aquatic floating plants like phytoplanktons may be present. Then after over a period of time, so then we have the zone of recovery. So under this stage, the water will water will become turbid with settlement of the sludge. So here what happens, whenever the degradation of organic matter has taken place, so the sludge has to settle at the bottom. So it will slowly start to settle, and water will somewhat appear turbid. Okay, and the tolerant fishes like carp, buffalo, etc., which may be present at the before level whenever you discharge the sewage, so those starts to again flourish in this zone. Okay, so because the atmospheric oxygen will be supplied, and after over a period of time, the dissolved oxygen level will reach its saturation point. So this zone is called a zone of clear water. So here you can see the water with a very clear image with no bottom sludge, okay, because the water will starts to again have its startling appearance with the evolution of the fishes, like other fishes and some aquatic animals flourishing in this zone. So these are 4 different zones of pollution, okay, and it is also called as zones of purification in case of self purification of streams. Okay, so this is another figure showing so which is an illustration of a water body, a pack of water body, okay, and the type of organisms which survive under different zones, and this is the direction flow of the wastewater, and this is the distance or downstream distance. Whenever you discharge the sewage at a distance downstream, this will self purification will happen, and this distance it is very important, because so you in the previous class I told you that it is not advisable to place an intake or draw the water from any of these zones, okay. So we should extract water only from the downstream at a far away point wherever we have the clear zone, because if you place the intake and draw the water, then in this somewhere in this zone, then it will be impure water or polluted water, which again requires lot of treatment if you want to use that water for water supply using this stream, okay. So this downstream distance is also very important in case of self purification of streams, okay. So this is explained clearly in what is going to happen in different zones, okay. So this is the very preliminary zone. Whenever you discharge the sewage, here the dissolved oxygen level is reduced up to the 40% of the saturation value, okay. Then there is an increase in carbon dioxide content, then oxidation occurs, but it is slower than deoxygenation, so, okay. And these conditions are favorable for the development of aquatic life, and such as algae dies out, but certainly certain type of fishes may be present which are feeding on fresh organic matter, and typical some of the bottom dwelling organisms like worms such as lemon drillers and tubiflex appear with the sewage fungi, okay. So zone of active decomposition means here the water will start to change its color and it becomes grayish and darker than the previous zone because of the active decomposition taking place, okay. And also the anaerobic conditions prevail with the evolution of carbon dioxide and methane and hydrogen sulfide, so which may start to bubble at the surface, okay. And also the masses of sludge forming ugly scum layer on the surface because of the decomposition which is taking place, okay. Here the due to the excessive stabilization of organic matter, the deoxygenation becomes less than the reaeration rate, and the DO again rises to the original level, that is above 40%. In this region, the bacteria flora will flourish. At the upper end, an anaerobic bacteria will replace aerobic bacteria, while at the lower end the position will replace aerobic bacteria, while at the lower end position will be reversed. So protozoa and fungi first disappear, then again it starts to reappear, then fish life will be completely absent, okay. And some of the bottom dwelling organisms may be present, so which are tolerant, okay. So zone of recovery means here, so whenever the deoxygenation is happening, and at the same time the reaeration happens because of the atmospheric supply of the oxygen, here the algae starts to slowly reappear with and the fungi starts to decrease, the BOD decreases and DO content rises above the 40% of the saturation value. Here the organisms like protozoa, rotifers, crustaceans and large plants like sponges, bryozoans etc. will start to flourish, okay. And it will also a phase of mineralization to form the stable nitrate and phosphate and carbonate compounds. So zone of clear water, in this zone the river attains its original position, that is when you discharge the water before the wastewater is discharged into the river, the water will be in its natural form. So in the zone of clearer water, again water will become in its natural form and with a sparkling appearance, and water becomes attractive and the fishes starts to flourish, okay. And here the DO level may be brought back to its original saturation level, so which depends on the initial conditions of the receiving water bodies, okay. And most of the fishes starts to flourish, okay. And it becomes to the and you can see the water with a very clear zone, So what are the indices of self purification? Okay, so to know how much whether the self purification has happened or not, so we have to measure some of the parameters in the water. Okay, so the physical indices includes the color and turbidity. Okay, so here we have seen that during the self purification phenomena, out of 4 different zones, that is in the zone of degradation the color starts to deteriorate and turbidity appears. Okay, and in the zone of active decomposition the water appears to be black in color because of the decomposition activity. So these by these indices you can see at what stage the river is at during the process of self purification. And the chemical indices include the dissolved oxygen content, BOD, and suspended solids concentration. Okay, so that means here in the self purification phenomena, dissolved oxygen is very important parameter because it is an indicator to know the health of a river. Okay, so that I told you, if it is less than 4 mg per liter then it is toxic, and most of the fishes will not they die because of the absence of dissolved oxygen. So it is one of the important parameter. And also the biochemical oxygen demand. Okay, so that is when you sewage contains around 200 to 300 mg per liter. Okay, so of biochemical oxygen demand. So when you discharge in the river, the dilution happens, and at various levels in zone of active decomposition and zone of degradation, so the BOD level may vary, and again it may come back to its natural position of around 10 to 20 mg per liter, which is safe limit for the discharge of wastewater in the rivers. Okay, and also the biological indices include some of the microorganisms and all, like I told you, during the zone of active decomposition and all, only the fungi will be there and the algae will be absent, and in the zone of clearer water the algae starts to reappear. Okay, so because of the supply of the oxygen and all. Okay, so that is the different indices. Okay, so considering all these things, then we have to plot a curve which is called as the oxygen sac curve. Okay, so the oxygen sac curve is the oxygen deficit D at any point in a polluted river. Okay, so which is given by the saturation DO minus actual DO. Okay, so I'll show you the curve. Okay, so that you can understand it better. So here what happens, so whenever you discharge into any wastewater into the river, okay, so the different processes and aquatic efficiencies and aquatic life of the organisms present in the receiving water bodies, it varies. Okay, so like I told you in the previous slides that some of the indicator organisms can be seen at different levels. Okay, so if the dissolved oxygen is more and more, then most of the fishes and other species will survive because of the more presence of oxygen. Okay, and if the dissolved level starts to decrease, only you can see some species of bacteria, and again if it further drops, you can see some of the protozoas, and if the dissolved oxygen level again starts to increase, then the fishes will again reappear. Okay, so those things will happen in the receiving water bodies. Okay, so different species will survive at different oxygen levels and at different zones in a river. Okay, then we have the two different curves. Okay, so which comes along with the oxygen sac curve. Okay, so we have something called as deoxygenation curve. Okay, what is this deoxygenation curve? Okay, in a polluted stream the DO content goes on reducing due to decomposition. Like I told you, whenever you discharge the wastewater, there will be some saturation level of the dissolved oxygen, and that will start to slowly reduce. Okay, so and that is given by this curve. It is called as a deoxygenation curve. Okay, hence the depleting level of the dissolved oxygen with time is called as deoxygenation curve, and it is similar to the first stage BOD. Okay, then we have something called as reoxygenation curve. Okay, reoxygenation curve is the one. Okay, so like I told you, when you discharge the wastewater, the deoxygenation takes place. At the same time, the nature supplies the atmospheric oxygen to the receiving water body. Okay, and it is a natural phenomena. Okay, and thereby there is another curve which comes into picture, that is called as reoxygenation. Reoxygenation means addition of the atmospheric oxygen to the receiving water body or a stream. Okay, and this reoxygenation, it depends on different factors. That means the velocity of the stream and the turbulence which is created. That means if the velocity of the stream is more and the turbulence is more, because of the more turbulence, the maximum atmospheric air can be mixed in the receiving water body, thereby resulting the concentration of more oxygen in the receiving water body. And also the depth of the receiving water, and lesser is the depth of the water, then more is the rate. That is, if the depth of the river stretch is less, then more and more air can come in contact with the air, thereby increasing the reoxygenation. Then temperature of the rate decreases with increase in temperature. Like we have discussed that dissolved oxygen is inversely related to the temperature. If the temperature of the water is less, then the dissolved oxygen content can be more. Then the saturation deficit or the deficit below the saturation value. Okay, so depending upon these factors, the rate of deoxygenation can be expressed mathematically and plotted in the form of a curve. It is called as a reoxygenation curve. Okay, so then considering these two things, we have something called as oxygen sac curve, or it is also called as oxygen deficit curve. Okay, so it is explained by a phenomena. It is the natural process which is going to happen in the self purification is explicitly expressed by these curves. Okay, so here the deoxygenation and reoxygenation process, it occurs simultaneously, that is, they go hand in hand. Okay, here in this case, if the deoxygenation is more rapid, then the reoxygenation an oxygenation deficit occurs. That means if more and more wastewater is discharged and the decomposition continues for a longer period of time, then the deoxygenation is rampant. Okay, and there won't be much of oxygen available in the receiving water body. Okay, so that thing we call it as oxygen deficit. That means there will be deficit of oxygen due to the reduced level of dissolved oxygen in the receiving water bodies. Okay, so the amount of resultant oxygen deficit can be obtained algebraically by adding the deoxygenation and reoxygenation curves. Okay, so the resulting curve so obtained is called as oxygen sac curve, or it is also called as oxygen deficit curve. From the curve, the oxygen deficit D and oxygen balance 100 minus D percentage in a stream after a certain lapse of time can be found out. Okay, so that means I told you during the self purification phenomena, the four phases will occur, and we have to know at what level this self purification is happening, and we have to check at every level the dissolved oxygen content, so as to see whether the self purification phenomena has happened or not, or it is also an indicator that the self purification is happening in a particular river or a stream or not. So this can be obtained by the measuring the dissolved oxygen level at various stages in a downstream of a river. Okay, and the point where this curve meets, that point we call as critical time and TC. Okay, so that can be shown by the curve here. Okay, so this is the what you can see, like I told you, this is the picture which is depicting, showing the dissolved oxygen level at a saturation level. Let us see during the zone of clearer water before discharging the sewage, the saturation limit of this river is 8 ppm. Okay, and this is the direction of flow. Imagine you have a distance from 0 kilometer up to 4 or 5 kilometer in a river. Okay, so here at the initial level the dissolved oxygen may be 8 ppm, and slowly when the oxygen level starts to deplete, then it may reach 6 ppm or 2 ppm, and this point is called as the critical point. Okay, where the dissolved oxygen level becomes almost zero, and again the dissolved oxygen starts to reappear. Okay, and it will again reach its saturation value at a distance of around 3 to 4 kilometers, depending upon the situation of the and organic matter and situation of the receiving water body, and this curve is called as the oxygen sac curve. Okay, so it is expressed mathematically here. Okay, so this is the time of flow in T days from point of pollution, and this is the DO depletion level. Okay, this is the saturation level. Okay, so that is 100 is the saturation level or percentage of the dissolved oxygen. Okay, so this curve is called as the deoxygenation curve. Okay, so that means from the saturation value, the dissolved oxygen, when you discharge the sewage, it starts to slowly reduce. Okay, so which can be expressed by this curve, and that is why it is called as deoxygenation. That means removal of oxygen or utilization of oxygen by the organic matter and bacteria, okay, to oxidize the organic matter by the bacteria in the river systems, in the receiving river systems the oxygen is consumed. So that's why it is shown by this curve. From the 100% saturation value, it slowly starts to decrease, and at the same time we have one more curve, so that is called as reoxygenation curve. Okay, so here you can see the from the zero it is starting to, and it is slowly it is rising. Okay, so that means that this is a natural phenomena. The atmospheric oxygen which is present in the atmosphere, it will be supplied and it gets mixed with the water. Okay, so that process we call it as reoxygenation. Okay, and when these two curves, that is the addition of these two curves meets, so that point we call it as critical point. So this is called as the oxygen sac curve. Okay, as you can see, the DO level, it starts slowly depreciating and again it is increasing. Okay, so this point, when these two curves meet, that point we call it as critical point. Okay, here the maximum DO deficit occurs at this critical point. Okay, and this is how it is expressed mathematically, and this is called as the oxygen sac curve. Okay, so sometimes it will be asked for the explain the self purification phenomena with a oxygen sac curve. So then you have to explain by writing this diagram showing the critical point and the different curves like deoxygenation and reoxygenation. Okay, so this is the one more curve which is showing the deoxygenation and the reoxygenation process and oxygen deficit at different levels, and this is the saturation level, the point of pollution of amount at the initial level. Okay, so this is the time of scale. So time in days, here it may be time in days or it may be time in minutes, or it is a time level average, and this is the oxygen level concentration. Okay, so that is about the oxygen sap current self purification phenomena. So then we have the disposal issues with respect to lake. See here, the disposal, I told you, it can be done onto the land or onto the water bodies. So in the previous classes we have studied that what is going to happen when you discharge the waste water in the flowing water systems or river or streams. Okay, so when you discharge waste water into the lake, the phenomena will be different, because in a river the water will be flowing, and at a distance far away at a downstream level the self purification is happening because the water will be under constant motion. Okay, so in case of lakes, so this will not happen. Okay, so because a lake is a water body, so which we don't flow anywhere. Okay, it is a confined space, so the water has to be retained in the lake for longer duration of the time. Okay, only little amount of oxygen is supplied. Okay, so because of the less turbulent and no velocity in the lake water systems, so it is a different process when you discharge the wastewater into the lakes. Okay, so let us see what is going to happen in case of disposal of wastewater in the lake. And this is the outfall sewer through which the wastewater is sometimes discharged into the lake here. Okay, so this again depends on the dilution factor. Okay, so if the dilution factor is less, okay, so then definitely we can use it as a source of disposal option into the lake, because if the lake water in the lake is more and more, then it will have the self purification in the lake as well. Okay, so here the pollutants majorly present in the industrial wastewater and domestic water, including the phosphorus and nitrates. So it is greatly affecting the lakes when you discharge any wastewater containing phosphorus and nitrates into the wastewater into the lakes. Okay, so and also the toxic chemicals present in the industrial wastewater may be present, so which is affecting most of the water quality, especially in the lakes, and they are damaging the aquatic life. Okay, and the lake pollution occurs at by the different sources, that is due to the discharge of sewers and also the agriculture runoff during the the rainfall and all, whenever the irrigation water is used in the agriculture fields, and that will leach into the lakes, and the industrial outfalls may discharge the water into the lakes, and some of the migration also happens through the groundwater into the lakes, and these are different sources of pollution into the lakes. Okay, so because of the excessive discharge of the pollutants, so we have to witness a phenomena called as the eutrophication of the lakes. Like in this picture you might have seen, in most of the lakes there will be excessive growth of these aquatic plants. Okay, so that is majorly due to the limiting nutrient like phosphorus and nitrogen or nitrates into the water. Like in most of the wastewater contains the phosphorus and all. The phosphorus will come from the soaps and detergents which we use excessively. Okay, so like you might have seen recently 6 months back and also last year there was huge frothing action which was taken place in Belandur Lake at Bangalore, okay, in our own Karnataka state. Okay, that was due to the excessive discharge of the pollutants in the form of nitrates and phosphorus, due to which the foaming was almost flying in the air from the lake. Okay, so that much excessive foaming have taken place in the lake. Okay, and this is the excessive growth of aquatic plants, okay, which is called as eutrophication. Okay, so what is this eutrophication? Here the phosphorus acts as a nutrients for the algal growth. Okay, so because phosphorus is a plant nutrient and excellent plant nutrient, so the excess of phosphorus which is present in the wastewater, so that will become the nutrient part for the algae, so which is the aquatic plant. Okay, and that will grow to a very large extent. It is also called as algal bloom. That means the deposition of algae over the surface of the water. Okay, so that is called as, and it will create a problem like taste and odor problems in the water. Okay, the entire lake gets covered with this algae and it may become useless for the organisms. Like I told you, this eutrophication will happen because of the excessive discharge of nitrogen and phosphorus. And here what happens, the algae will utilize this oxygen, okay, and in the presence of sunlight they starts to multiply and a very large layer of algae will starts to deposit on the surfaces. Okay, and this will create lot of problems. Okay, and it will reduce the passage of light to the bottom dwelling organisms, because if it gets deposited onto the surface, you might something look like this. Okay, this is a picture of water body. Okay, so the excessive growth of algae and aquatic plants on the lake surface. Okay, as you can see, so this will prevent the entry of sunlight deeper into the layers, so which is also essential for the some of the organisms, and also it will prevent the turbulent mixing of the atmospheric oxygen, and ultimately you will see a stage where most of the aquatic animals they starts to die and only some of the resistant species will starts to flourish. Okay, and this stage is called as the eutrophication, and the process is called as eutrophication, and the lake is called as eutrophic lake. Okay, and at the end I can say by concluding that dilution is not the solution for pollution. Okay, so because the dilution is having certain limits, like I told you in the previous lecture that there is something called as dilution factor. So dilution should be selected only when you have very less quantity of wastewater and very large quantity of water which should be present in the water bodies, either in case of lake or a river. Only in those circumstances then dilution can be an option. So otherwise, so we are actually polluting the pure form of rivers and lakes. If you are discharging if we are discharging more and more amount of the pollutants in the form of wastewater, then actually we are not treating it, we are polluting the fresh water bodies in the form of dilution, and that should not happen. So a careful consideration has to be made before you select dilution as an option. Okay, but nowadays the dilution is avoided, and people talk about zero discharge, and we should completely recycle and reuse the wastewater coming out from a big apartment or any multi-story building or from any communities, and so as to use the water for effective some other purpose like sewage irrigation, or for the secondary purposes for gardening and vehicle washing and all, instead of discharging this water into the lakes. Okay, so which will also save the requirement for the fresh water demand, okay, for gardening and other purposes. Okay, so we'll stop at this stage.